There's a certain kind of quiet that settles over you when you've been defeated. It's not a peaceful quiet. It's the ringing in your ears after an explosion, the hum of a fluorescent light in an empty room after everyone else has gone home to celebrate. For 3 years, that quiet was the soundtrack to my life at Sterling Solutions. My name is Stephanie, and for a long time I let that silence define me. I let it convince me that I was the problem. But sometimes, the quietest person in the room is just waiting for the right moment to make some noise. And believe me, when I finally did, it was deafening. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or just plain invisible, then you need to hear this. Stick with me, because the story of how I destroyed my misogynistic boss on a dusty softball field is about more than just a game. It's about taking back your power, one base at a time. It all started, as these things so often do, with an email. The subject line was offensively cheerful. "Let's hit a home run for team spirit." I felt my stomach clench before I even opened it. It was from my boss, Vince Gallo. Vince was a man who seemed to have been sculpted from a block of pure, unadulterated smarm. He had that kind of loud, backslapping bonhomie that insecure men use as a shield, and a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He was, to put it mildly, a notorious misogynist. It wasn't the cartoonish, wolf-whistling kind. It was the far more insidious, modern variety. The kind that talks about diversity initiatives in company-wide meetings, and then behind closed doors, tells you that you're just a little too emotional for a leadership role. The kind that praises your work ethic in one breath and promotes a less qualified man in the next. I knew this because it had happened to me 3 times. The first time, the senior analyst position went to Mark, a guy who still needed my help formatting his spreadsheets. Vince's excuse? Mark had great executive presence. The second time, the project manager role went to Kevin, a man who once accidentally deleted an entire client database and tried to blame it on a solar flare. Vince's reasoning? Kevin was a real go-getter. The third time, just a month before the infamous email, the promotion to department lead went to Chad. Chad's primary qualification seemed to be his ability to laugh at all of Vince's terrible jokes and fetch him coffee without being asked. The meeting where Vince told me the news was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. He sat across his ridiculously large mahogany desk, steepling his fingers like a Bond villain. He'd said, "Stephanie, your work is solid, really top-notch. But leadership requires more than just ticking boxes. It's about synergy. It's about being a team player. And frankly, some of the feedback I've gotten is that you can be a bit of a loner. You keep to yourself. You're not always part of the group dynamic." A team player. That was his new favorite phrase. It was the perfect, unprovable, subjective weapon. How do you defend against that? How do you quantify your contributions to a group dynamic when the group leader actively excludes you? I had organized the team lunches he took credit for. I had mentored the junior analysts he barely knew the names of. I had stayed late to fix the messes made by his go-getters. But I wasn't a team player. What he meant, what we both knew he meant, was that I wasn't one of the guys. I didn't go for beers with him after work. I didn't play golf. I didn't engage in the casual locker room banter that he disguised as team building. So, I wasn't a team player. And that was that. I just sat there, the quiet ringing in my ears, and nodded. That brings me back to the email. I opened it, and the cloying corporate cheerfulness washed over me. Vince, in his infinite wisdom, had decided that to boost morale and foster a sense of teamwork, his words, "Our entire department's participation in the company's co-ed softball league was now mandatory." Not encouraged, not suggested, mandatory. He wrote that attendance at all practices and games would be considered part of our performance reviews. A wave of groans echoed through our open-plan office. I saw Brenda from marketing roll her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. I saw David from IT, a quiet guy who just wanted to be left alone with his code, physically shrink into his chair. But I just stared at the screen. Mandatory. He was going to force me to be a team player on his terms. On a softball field. A slow, strange feeling began to unspool in my gut. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something else. Something cold and sharp. Vince had no idea who I was. To him, I was just Stephanie, the quiet, competent woman in the corner cubicle. He didn't know that my father had put a baseball glove in my hand before I could even walk. He didn't know that I'd spent every summer of my youth on dusty diamonds, learning the geometry of a double play, the precise arc of a throw from deep in the hole. And he certainly didn't know that the woman he just called not a team player had been the starting shortstop for a Division I college team, a team that had fought its way to the Women's College World Series. Twice. He saw a loner, a box ticker. He had no idea he had just handed a loaded weapon to the one person in the room who knew exactly how to use it. The email ended with another insufferable exclamation point. "See you all on the field. Let's show them what Sterling Solutions is made of." I closed the email, and for the first time in a very long time, the ringing in my ears stopped. It was replaced by a different kind of quiet. The quiet of a predator that has just spotted its prey. That night, I went home to my small, neat apartment, the one I could afford because I was a solid worker, but not a leader. The forced enthusiasm of Vince's email felt like a sour taste in my mouth. I dropped my keys on the counter, the clatter echoing in the silence. And then, the weight of the last 3 years crashed down on me. It wasn't just the promotions, it was the 1,000 tiny cuts that came with them. It was being talked over in meetings. It was having my ideas pitched by Chad 5 minutes later to roaring approval. It was the condescending pats on the shoulder, the assumptions that I would be the one to take notes, to order the lunch, to clean up the conference room. It was the slow, grinding erosion of my confidence, the insidious whisper in the back of my mind that maybe, just maybe, Vince was right. Maybe I was the problem. I sank onto my sofa, the fabric cool against my skin, and just stared at the wall. The anger I'd suppressed for so long began to bubble up, hot and acrid. I thought back to that first time, 3 years ago. The senior analyst promotion. I had been with the company for 4 years, consistently exceeding my targets. Mark had been there for 1. I had a master's degree in data analytics. He had a bachelor's in communications. I had single-handedly developed the reporting system that saved our department thousands of dollars in outsourced work. He had organized the office March Madness pool. When Vince called me into his office to tell me Mark got the job, his excuse was different. It wasn't about being a team player yet. He was still workshopping his material. Back then he'd said, "Stephanie, Mark just has a way with the clients. He builds rapport. It's a soft skill, you understand, hard to quantify, but vital. You're brilliant with the numbers, but we need a people person in that role." A people person. Mark, who once called a major client by the wrong name for an entire 30-minute phone call. But he was tall and played golf with Vince on Saturdays. So he was a people person. I had accepted it. I told myself to work harder, to be more visible, to prove my value beyond the numbers. Then came the second time, a year later, the project manager role. This one hurt more. I had practically been doing the job already, unofficially leading the team on the flagship Maxwell account. We were ahead of schedule and under budget. The client was thrilled. The promotion should have been a formality, but it went to Kevin. Kevin, who was Vince's nephew-in-law. This time, the excuse was even more insulting. Vince had looked at me with a practiced sympathetic frown. He'd said, "Look, Steph, Kevin is family, but that's not why he got it. He's got that hunger, that drive. He's a real go-getter. He takes initiative. I just think you're more of a stabilizer. And every team needs a stabilizer. You're the rock, Stephanie. We can't afford to lose you as our rock." A rock. He called me a piece of inanimate geology to justify his blatant nepotism. A rock doesn't get a corner office. A rock doesn't get a 30% pay raise. A rock just sits there, solid and reliable, while the go-getters climb all over it to get a better view. And I, like a fool, had swallowed that too. I'd let him placate me with empty compliments while he undermined my entire career path. The third time, with Chad, was the one that broke me. It wasn't just that he was the least qualified of all of them. It was the casual, dismissive way Vince had delivered the not a team player line. It was a checkmate move in his little game. It was an accusation so vague it was impossible to disprove, and so damning it could be used to justify any decision he made. He had finally found the perfect excuse, the one he could use forever. I would never be one of the boys, so I would never be a team player, so I would never be a leader. It was a closed loop of misogyny, and I was trapped inside it. I stood up and walked over to the closet in my spare room. It was packed with boxes of things I didn't know what to do with, remnants of a life I rarely talked about at work. I pulled down a heavy-duty storage tub, the plastic groaning in protest. I blew a layer of dust off the lid and clicked it open. The smell hit me first. A mix of old leather, infield dirt, and faded glory. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were my treasures. My old glove, a Rawlings heart of the hide, the leather worn to a perfect soft pliability in the pocket, a collection of game balls, their scuffed white hides covered in faded ink signatures from my teammates, and at the bottom, 2 heavy silver-plated trophies from our back-to-back appearances in the national championships. I picked up the glove and slid my hand into it. It was like shaking hands with my own ghost. The muscle memory was instantaneous. I punched the pocket, the sound a satisfying thud that echoed through the quiet apartment. I remembered the feeling of it, the absolute focus, the world shrinking down to just me, the batter, and the ball. The crack of the bat was a starting pistol, and the next few seconds were a blur of instinct and motion. The charge, the backhand snag deep in the hole, the spin, the plant, the throw, a seamless, violent ballet. On that field, there was no ambiguity. There were no soft skills or group dynamics. There was only performance. You made the play, or you didn't. You got the hit, or you didn't. You were a teammate because you backed up the third baseman on a steal, because you relayed the cutoff throw perfectly, because you laid down a sacrifice bunt to move a runner into scoring position. It was the most honest, merit-based system I had ever known, and Vince, in his arrogant stupidity, was forcing me back into it. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. The bottom of the 9th in the national semi-final. We were up by 1, bases loaded, 2 outs. The other team's best hitter was at the plate. The tension was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. Our pitcher was rattled. Our coach called time and came to the mound. He looked at all of us, his eyes burning with intensity. He didn't give some rah-rah speech. He looked right at me. He said, "Steph, you're the captain. You're the anchor. Whatever happens, you hold the line. Settle them down." He went back to the dugout. I walked to the mound, tapped my pitcher on the arm, and just said, "Breathe. Look at me. I've got your back. I'm not letting anything get through. I promise." She took a deep breath, nodded, and got back on the rubber. The batter hit a screaming line drive, a rocket destined for the left center gap, a walk-off, but I was already moving. I'd taken 2 steps to my right on instinct the second the bat made contact. I leaped, my body horizontal to the ground, my arm stretched out as far as it could go. I felt the ball smack into the webbing of my glove, a violent sting that I barely registered. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me, but I held on. Game over. We were going to the championship. My teammates piled on top of me, screaming, crying, a chaotic mess of pure joy. I was at the bottom of that pile, gasping for air, covered in dirt, and I had never felt more like part of a team in my entire life. I stood there in my quiet apartment, holding my old glove, the memory a stark contrast to the sterile, passive-aggressive world of Sterling Solutions. That was being a team player. That was leadership. And Vince had no idea. He was about to find out. Just then, My phone buzzed. It was my best friend, Maya. We'd known each other since that same college, though she was a theater major who thought a bunt was a type of small cake. The text read, "You okay? Heard about the mandatory fun league. Vince is a tool." I called her immediately. The second she answered, the dam broke. I told her everything. Not just about the softball league, but about Chad, and Kevin, and Mark. About being called a rock, and a loner. About the soul-crushing quiet of being repeatedly, systematically, and deliberately undervalued. I paced my living room, the old glove still on my hand, the words pouring out of me in a torrent of frustration and hurt. When I finally finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Maya said, her voice dangerously calm, "Okay, so you're going to do it, right?" "Do what? Play? I have to. It's mandatory," I said, my voice flat. "No, Steph," she said, and I could hear the grin in her voice now. "Not just play. You're going to go to the first practice and you are going to be the most uncoordinated, clumsy, utterly hopeless human being to ever pick up a ball. You're going to trip over your own feet. You're going to let grounders go right through your legs. You're going to swing a bat like it's a wet noodle." I stopped pacing. "Why would I do that?" "Because Vince is a creature of ego," she said, her voice warming to the topic. "You're going to let him coach you. You're going to listen to his terrible advice with a wide-eyed, earnest expression. You're going to make him feel big and smart and powerful. You will be his little project. The hopeless girl he's magnanimously teaching to be a team player. You will document every condescending comment, every sexist joke, every moment of his managerial incompetence. You will lull him into a state of absolute, unshakable certainty that you are a liability." A slow, wicked smile spread across my face. I was starting to see it. "And then what?" "And then," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "You wait. You wait for the one game that actually matters, and in that game you will unleash the fury of a D1 national champion upon his smug, unsuspecting world. You will not just play well. You will be a goddess of the diamond. You will make him look like the fool he is in front of the one person he can't afford to look foolish in front of." The prompt had mentioned one crucial detail, a detail that was now glowing in my mind like a neon sign. The league championship was next week, and our biggest rival is the team from our most important client's company, run by their CEO, a woman who is a die-hard softball fan. Her name was Eleanor Vance, the CEO of Acorn Summit Solutions, our biggest account. An account Vince was always terrified of losing. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about strategy. It was about creating a stage, setting the lights, and writing a script where Vince was the star of his own downfall. A little shiver of excitement, an emotion I hadn't felt in years, ran through me. The plan was audacious. It was theatrical. It was perfect. I looked at the trophy glinting on my floor. I looked at the worn leather of my glove. The quiet was gone, replaced by the low hum of a brewing storm. Maya's voice brought me back. "Steph, you still there?" I took a deep breath. "Maya," I said, a grin spreading across my face. It wasn't about revenge until it was. "Tell me more about this plan." The next few weeks were a masterclass in deception. My plan, fleshed out over late-night calls with Maya, had 3 phases. Phase 1, Operation Bambi on Ice. Phase 2, the quiet rebellion. Phase 3, the showcase. I was living a double life. By day, I was the same quiet, efficient Stephanie at my desk. But during our twice-weekly practices, I became a different person entirely. I became the caricature of a woman who has never encountered a sphere of any kind. The first practice was at a shabby public park with more weeds than grass. Vince gathered us around, puffed up his chest, and gave a speech that was equal parts cringeworthy corporate jargon and bad sports movie cliches. He talked about synergy on the field and thinking outside the batter's box. He then started assessing his talent. When he got to me, he tossed me a ball. "Let's see what you've got, Stephanie." As per Maya's instructions, I fumbled it, bobbled it, and finally dropped it, looking at my hands as if they'd personally betrayed me. Chad, the new department lead, snickered. "Easy there, Butterfingers." Vince just sighed, a long-suffering, paternalistic sigh. Okay. We've got some work to do. That's why we're a team. We lift each other up." He spent the next 10 minutes showing me how to hold a glove, his hand lingering on mine for just a second too long, his voice dripping with condescension. "You want to make a basket with it, see? A nice soft basket." I nodded earnestly, my face a mask of grateful confusion, while inside my D1 coach's voice was screaming obscenities in my head. During fielding practice, I was a disaster artist. I'd let easy grounders roll right through my legs, then make a frantic, flailing attempt to pick them up. I'd dutifully run after them, my movements deliberately awkward. On throws, I'd adopt a bizarre side-armed motion that sent the ball wobbling 10 feet to the left of my target. Vince would yell, No. Over the top, Stephanie. Like you're throwing a rock at a snake." I would try again, making it marginally better, but still hopelessly incompetent. He loved it. He was in his element, the great male savior teaching the helpless female. He'd put his arm around my shoulders. "Don't worry, we'll make a ball player out of you yet." It was humiliating. It was infuriating. But every condescending remark, every patronizing piece of advice, was a drop of fuel on a bonfire I was building in my mind. And I was documenting everything. After each practice, I'd go home and write in a private journal. I noted the date, the time, and the exact words he used. Vince told me I throw like a girl, then laughed. Chad and Kevin joined in. Vince singled me out during drills, saying, "Let's watch Stephanie so we all know what not to do." During the team huddle, Vince said we needed more killer instinct, then looked directly at me and Brenda, and said some of us just don't have it. It was a meticulous record of his toxicity, a private dossier of his unsuitability for leadership. At the same time, I was executing Phase 2, the quiet rebellion. Vince's idea of managing the team was to put all his sycophants in the key positions. Chad played first base, Kevin was at third, and Vince himself, of course, was the pitcher. He fancied himself a Greg Maddux type, all strategy and control, but he threw with the speed of a gentle breeze and the accuracy of a lawn sprinkler. The rest of us were just bodies to fill the empty spaces on the field. But I started to notice the other bodies. There was David, the quiet coder from IT, who Vince had stuck out in right field, the traditional hiding spot for the least athletic player. But I'd seen David in the company gym. The guy was wiry and fast. And I noticed during practice, when he thought no one was watching, he'd make these incredible running catches, then immediately pretend it was a clumsy accident. Our eyes met once, after he snagged a fly ball over his shoulder, and he gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He was another one, a quiet resistor. Then there was Brenda from marketing, a sharp, cynical woman in her late 40s who had been at Sterling even longer than I had. Vince had her playing catcher, a position she clearly despised. She'd squat behind the plate with an expression of profound boredom, barely bothering to stick her glove out for Vince's wild pitches, but she saw everything. After Vince made a particularly stupid coaching decision, trying a bizarre trick play that ended with two of our runners tagged out at the same base, Brenda jogged past me on the way to the dugout and muttered without moving her lips, "The man's a tactical genius." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. And there was Clara, a junior designer who had joined the company about 6 months ago. She was young, brilliant, and full of ideas. I'd seen Vince treat her in meetings the same way he used to treat me, ignoring her input, dismissing her contributions. He put her in left field, and she was genuinely not very athletic. She was trying, but she was scared of the ball. Vince would yell at her constantly. "Get in front of it, Clara. Don't be a matador." One practice, after she'd misjudged a fly ball, she came back to the dugout looking like she was about to cry. Vince just shook his head in disgust. I walked over and sat next to her. "Hey," I said softly, "don't listen to him. He doesn't know what he's talking about." She looked up. her eyes wide. "I'm just so bad at this." "No, you're not." I lied, but with a purpose. "You're just thinking too much. Let me show you a little trick my dad taught me." I spent the next 5 minutes quietly talking to her, not about mechanics, but about focus, about watching the ball come off the bat, about listening for the sound, about anticipating. I showed her how to position her feet. It was basic stuff, but I said it without condescension. I treated her like a person. At the end of our talk, she gave me a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Stephanie." It was the beginning of an alliance. I started a group chat, ostensibly for softball stuff, but I only invited David, Brenda, and Clara. I called it the Dugout Rebels. At first, the chat was just jokes about Vince's coaching. Then it became a place to vent about work. Brenda shared a story about how Vince stole her marketing concept for the Acorn Summit account and presented it as his own. David told us about how Vince constantly belittled the IT department, calling them nerds in the basement until he needed his laptop fixed. Clara confessed that she was already looking for a new job because she couldn't stand the way Vince treated her. We were a team, not Vince's team, but our own. A small secret coalition of the overlooked. Meanwhile, I was doing my own research. Phase 3, the showcase, required the perfect stage, and that stage was the championship game against Acorn Summit Solutions. I spent hours online, not looking at softball stats, but at corporate profiles. I learned everything I could about their CEO, Eleanor Vance. I found an old article from a university alumni magazine. It turned out, she hadn't just been a fan of softball, like me, she had played in college. Not D1, but a very competitive D3 program, where she was a star pitcher. She was known for her fierce competitiveness and her no-nonsense attitude. The article quoted her. "I have no patience for people who don't do the work. In business or on the field, you earn your spot. Entitlement is a disease." This was it. This was the hidden leverage. The championship game wasn't just a game, it was a job interview. It was a character reference. It was a final exam for Vince, and he had no idea he was about to fail it spectacularly. I found a picture of her from her college days, standing on a pitcher's mound, her eyes burning with the same fire I felt in myself. She wasn't just the client, she was the jury. Our team, the Sterling Slackers as Brenda had nicknamed us, somehow bumbled our way through the regular season. We lost more games than we won, mostly due to Vince's ego. He insisted on pitching every inning of every game, refusing to let anyone else even try. His favorites, Chad and Kevin, made error after error in key moments, but were never criticized. David's speed in the outfield, and a few lucky hits from some of the other disgruntled employees, were just enough to squeak us into the playoffs as the lowest seed. Vince, of course, took all the credit. "See, my system works. We're building momentum," he'd bellow, clapping himself on the back. My own performance remained a carefully calibrated work of art. I was just bad enough to be non-threatening, but not so bad that it looked like I was actively sabotaging the team. I'd make a clumsy stop here and there, which Vince would praise lavishly. "See, Stephanie, you're getting it. I knew you had it in you." I'd strike out looking at a pitch right down the middle, then look back at the dugout with a helpless shrug. Vince would just shake his head, a smirk on his face, as if to say, "What can you do?" I was his pet project, his proof that he was a benevolent and patient leader. The thought of it made me sick, but I held my course. The long game. It was all about the long game. The stage was being set. The actors were in position, and the star of the show had no idea he was about to be upstaged. The semi-final game was against a team from the accounting department. They were surprisingly good. Going into the bottom of the last inning, we were down by 2 runs. The atmosphere in our dugout was tense. Vince was pacing back and forth, his face red with frustration. This wasn't part of his glorious narrative. He was supposed to be the heroic manager leading his scrappy underdogs to victory, not the chump about to get knocked out of the playoffs by a bunch of accountants. "Come on," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Where's the fire? Where's the killer instinct?" I was sitting on the bench between Brenda and David. Brenda leaned over and whispered, "My killer instinct is telling me to wrap a bat around his head." David just stared straight ahead, a muscle twitching in his jaw. We managed to get 2 runners on base with 2 outs. It was my turn to bat. As I walked to the plate, Vince pulled me aside. He put his hands on my shoulders, his face a mask of patronizing encouragement. "Okay, Stephanie, no pressure, just try to make contact. Don't swing too hard, just a little poke, a blooper. Let the real hitters behind you do the work." I looked him right in the eye and gave him my most earnest, hopeful nod. "Okay, Vince, I'll try my best." I stepped into the batter's box. The accounting pitcher was tired, and he was lobbing them in. The first pitch was a slow, looping arc right over the heart of the plate. It was the kind of pitch I used to dream about. I could have hit it into the next county, but that wasn't the plan. Not yet. I swung late, fouling it off with a clumsy-looking chop. "That's okay." "Good cut," Vince yelled, the encouragement ringing false. The second pitch was the same. I took a full, wild swing, my form a perfect imitation of someone who has no idea what they're doing. I spun around and almost fell over. Strike 2. Chad, who was on deck, laughed out loud. "Just don't hit me with the bat, Steph." Vince was now yelling, "Protect the plate. Choke up. Just meet it." I stepped out of the box, took a deep breath, and caught David's eye. He was on second base. I gave him the slightest of head fakes, a sign we had worked out in our secret chat. It meant get ready to run on anything. He gave a nearly invisible nod back. I stepped back in. The pitcher, smelling blood, threw another one right down the middle. This time, I didn't swing for the fences. I did exactly what a clumsy, terrified batter would do. I stuck my bat out defensively, but instead of a weak little nubber, I used the skills I'd honed over 1,000 hours of practice. I angled the bat perfectly at the last second, directing the ball not towards an infielder, but into that awkward dead zone just past the pitcher's mound, and to the right of the charging second baseman. It was a seeing eye single, a piece of luck. The ball trickled onto the grass. Chaos erupted. The second baseman and the pitcher both ran for it, confused. David, who had taken off on contact, rounded third and slid into home plate just ahead of the frantic late throw. The other runner moved to third. I pulled up at first base, a look of shocked surprise on my face. Vince was ecstatic. "Yes, see, I told you, just make contact. Way to be a team player, Stephanie." I had just executed a perfect push bunt, a play that required immense bat control, but to him, it was just a lucky, clumsy swing. The illusion was holding. Chad was up next. He swaggered to the plate, full of himself. He swung at the first pitch with all his might and hit a towering pop fly, straight up in the air. It was a routine play for the shortstop, but as the ball went up, I took a step off first and yelled, "I got it." The shortstop, confused by a first baseman calling for a pop-up in his territory, hesitated for just a fraction of a second. That hesitation was all Brenda, our catcher and a surprisingly savvy base runner, needed. She was coaching from the third base line and saw the confusion. She sent our runner from third screaming home. The shortstop caught the ball for the third out, but the runner had already tagged up and crossed the plate before the catch. The run counted. We had won the game. We were going to the championship. Our team erupted in a mix of genuine and feigned celebration. Vince was practically vibrating with self-congratulation. "That's what I'm talking about. Heads up baseball. Synergy." He ran over and clapped me on the back, hard. "You started it all, Stephanie. Your little hit got us going. See what happens when you listen to your coach." But later, as we were packing up our gear, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a tiny crack in his smug facade. He was looking at me, then at the spot on the field where my lucky hit had landed. He was replaying it in his head. It didn't quite add up. The hit was too perfect in its imperfection. The timing of my "I got it" yell was too disruptive. A man like Vince, whose entire world is built on a fragile sense of his own superiority, can sense when the ground is shifting beneath his feet, even if he can't understand why. His panic wasn't about the game we just won. It was a dawning, terrifying suspicion that he wasn't in control, and for a narcissist like Vince, a loss of control is a fate worse than death. He was rattled, and a rattled Vince was a predictable Vince. The final piece of the plan was about to fall into place. The week leading up to the championship game was electric, with a strange, nervous energy. Vince was more on edge than I had ever seen him. His usual forced joviality was replaced with a tense, brittle sharpness. He started micromanaging everything, not just on the field, but in the office. He'd hover over my desk, checking my work, questioning my methods on tasks I'd been doing for years. "Are you sure that's the most efficient way to run those numbers, Stephanie? Chad has a new macro that might be faster." It was his way of reasserting his dominance, of putting me back in my box. He needed to believe I was the incompetent he'd decided I was. 2 days before the game, he called a special strategy session in a conference room. It was supposed to be for the softball team, but it felt more like an interrogation. He put a diagram of a softball field up on the whiteboard and proceeded to lecture us for an hour. His strategies were nonsensical. He wanted David, our fastest player, to stop stealing bases because it was too risky. He wanted to implement a defensive shift against the Acorn Summit team based on a single game summary he'd read online. It was madness. At the end of the meeting, he turned to me. "Stephanie," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm thinking of making a change for the championship. Your hitting has been inconsistent. I might have Clara play shortstop and put you on the bench. We need our strongest bats in the lineup for this one." The room went silent. Benched. After my lucky hit had started the game-winning rally, it was a pure power play. A public humiliation designed to remind me, and everyone else who was in charge. Clara looked at me in horror. She knew she couldn't play shortstop. This was Vince trying to provoke a reaction, to get me to argue, to be emotional, to prove his point about me not being a team player. I looked back at him, my face a carefully constructed mask of disappointment. "Okay, Vince," I said, my voice quiet. "Whatever you think is best for the team." His eyes narrowed. This wasn't the reaction he wanted. He wanted a fight. I had given him quiet compliance. It threw him off balance. He stammered for a second, then said, "Well, nothing's decided yet. We'll see how you look in the final practice." That night, the dugout rebels met, not online, but in person. I had called a secret, unofficial practice at a different park, one across town. I told David, Brenda, and Clara to come, and to quietly invite anyone else they trusted. To my surprise, almost the entire team showed up, except for Vince's loyal trio, Chad, Kevin, and one other sycophant from sales. They gathered on the dusty field under the dim park lights, confused and curious. "What's this about, Steph?" Brenda asked, crossing her arms. "If this is for more of Vince's synergies drills, I'm out." I didn't say anything. I just dropped my gear bag on the ground, pulled out my laptop, and set it on the bench. I clicked open a file, and turned the screen towards them. It was a highlight reel, a 3-minute compilation of my college career. Diving stops in the hole, cannon-armed throws from my knees, line drives into the gap, a home run in the World Series. The video ended with a shot of me at the bottom of a celebratory dog pile, holding up a championship trophy. When it was over, there was a stunned silence. David's mouth was literally hanging open. Brenda just stared at me, then at the screen, then back at me. "You have got to be kidding me," she finally whispered. Clara was the first one to smile. "Oh my God," she said, her voice full of awe. "You're a ringer." "I'm not a ringer," I said, closing the laptop. "I'm a team player, and I'm tired of our team being led by an idiot. Vince is going to lose us this game. He's going to humiliate us in front of our biggest client. And he's going to do it because his ego is more important to him than winning, or teamwork, or any of us. I looked around at their faces, illuminated by the yellow glow of the park lights. On Saturday, Vince is going to put out his lineup. He's going to stand in the dugout and yell his stupid slogans, and we are going to completely and totally ignore him. A nervous energy filled the air. This was more than just a game now. It was a mutiny. I'm going to be on the field at shortstop, I continued. David, you're not playing right field anymore. You're playing center, and you have a green light to steal on any pitch you want. Brenda, you're going to call the pitches, not Vince. We're going to play our game, not his. We're going to trust each other. We're going to win. And we're going to do it while he watches, completely and utterly powerless. This was the power shift. The moment the team's loyalty transferred from the designated leader to the real one, it was a silent exodus from Vince's tyranny. For the next hour, we didn't just practice, we strategized, we talked. For the first time, we felt like a real team. We weren't the sterling slackers anymore. We had a purpose. We had a plan. And we had a leader they finally believed in. The stage was set. The curtain was about to rise. Game day. The air at the municipal sports complex was thick, with the smell of cut grass, hot dogs, and cheap beer. It was a perfect Saturday for softball. The stands were more crowded than usual. Word had gotten around that two corporate rivals were facing off, and the presence of Eleanor Vance, the CEO of Acorn Summit, had added a layer of executive-level intrigue. I saw her arrive, not in a corporate limo, but in a dusty Jeep. She wasn't wearing a suit. She wore jeans, a t-shirt for her alma mater, and a faded baseball cap. She didn't head for the VIP seats. She took a spot on the metal bleachers right behind our dugout, a scorecard and a pencil in her hand. She was here to watch a ball game. Vince was in his element, or so he thought. He strutted around in his pristine team jersey, which was a size too small and strained at the buttons over his stomach. He shook hands with the umpire. He made a big show of handing in his lineup card. As I'd predicted, he'd put me back at shortstop. His attempt to bench me had failed to provoke me, so he'd reverted to his original plan, confident that my incompetence would be on full display. He had no idea that the lineup card he'd handed in was already obsolete. He gathered us for a pre-game huddle. "All right, team," he boomed, his voice echoing with false confidence. "This is it. The big one. Leave it all on the field. No regrets. Play for the name on the front of the jersey, not the one on the back." He finished his string of cliches and looked around, expecting cheers. He got nothing. Just a collection of blank, unreadable faces. We just looked at him, then at each other. The mutiny was silent, but it was absolute. His authority had vanished. A flicker of panic crossed his face again, but he quickly plastered on his smarmy smile and clapped his hands. "Okay, let's go get him." We took the field for the top of the first inning. I trotted out to shortstop, the familiar feel of the dirt under my cleats calming my nerves. I punched the pocket of my glove. This was my office now. David, ignoring Vince's lineup card, jogged out to center field. Brenda put on her catcher's gear. Vince stood in the dugout, arms crossed, ready to manage. The first batter for Acorn Summit stepped up. He was a big, athletic-looking guy. Brenda called for a pitch, a fastball on the outside corner. Vince from the dugout yelled, "No, no, jam him inside. Bust him in on the hands." Brenda and our pitcher, a quiet guy from accounting named Tom, completely ignored him. Tom threw the pitch. Brenda called. The batter swung and hit a sharp ground ball to my left, into the hole between short and third. In practice, this was the ball I would have flailed at and missed. Now instinct took over. I didn't think. I just reacted. 2 quick crossover steps, a backhand snag deep on the grass, a fluid spin and a laser beam throw to first base. The ball smacked into Chad's glove a full half-second before the runner got there. 1 out. The dugout was silent. The crowd let out an appreciative "ooh." I saw Eleanor Vance lean forward on the bleachers. Her eyes narrowed. She made a note on her scorecard. Vince just stared, his mouth slightly agape. He looked from me to the first base bag, as if trying to process the physics of what had just happened. He probably wrote it off as a one-time fluke, a blind squirrel finding a nut. The next batter hit a soft liner over second base, a sure single. But David, playing in his rightful position in center field, got an incredible jump on the ball. He charged in, dove, and caught it just inches from the grass. 2 outs. Vince, who had wanted David in right field, was speechless. The third batter struck out on 3 pitches called by Brenda. 3 up, 3 down. We trotted back to the dugout. As I passed Vince, he grabbed my arm. "What was that?" he hissed, his voice a low growl. I looked at him, my face neutral. "I made a play, Vince. Isn't that what you wanted?" "That wasn't a play. That was luck," he sputtered. "And why is David in center?" "He's our fastest outfielder," I said simply. "He has more range there." I pulled my arm away and went to grab my helmet. His face was a thundercloud of confusion and rage. He was losing the script. This wasn't his story anymore. The game went on like that. We were a different team. A real team. David stole 2 bases. Brenda called a brilliant game, mixing pitches and keeping the Acorn hitters off balance. Clara, playing in the less demanding position of right field, made a surprisingly competent running catch on a lazy fly ball, and the whole team, led by me, cheered for her. Her face lit up with a genuine, beaming smile. We were communicating, backing each other up, playing with a joy and intensity that had been completely absent all season. And all the while, Vince stood in the dugout, growing more and more agitated, his shouts and instructions fading into irrelevant background noise. In the 4th inning, during a timeout, he couldn't take it anymore. He stormed out of the dugout and onto the field, straight towards me. He did it right in the middle of the diamond, in front of everyone, in front of Eleanor Vance. "What in the hell do you think you're doing, Stephanie?" he screamed, his face turning a blotchy purple. "This is my team. I am the manager. You are all defying my direct orders." The whole field went quiet. Everyone was watching. This was the moment, the confrontation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I just stood there, hands on my hips, and looked him dead in the eye. "You're the one who said this was mandatory, Vince," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying in the sudden silence. "You're the one who said I wasn't a team player. You're the one who said we needed to show some killer instinct. Well, look around. This is what a team looks like. This is what leadership looks like. Maybe if you recognized it in the office, we wouldn't have to be showing it to you out here." A gasp went through the crowd. I saw Eleanor Vance lean forward, a slow smile spreading across her face. Vince was completely stunned. He had expected tears, or yelling. He had no defense against calm, cold logic. He just stood there, sputtering, speechless, as the umpire walked over and told him to get back in the dugout. He slunk away, his face a mask of pure, undiluted humiliation. He had been rendered completely irrelevant. The game remained tight. Going into the bottom of the final inning, we were down by 1 run, 3-0. This was it, the storybook ending. Our first 2 batters made outs. It came down to this: 2 outs, nobody on, and it was my turn to bat. As I walked to the plate, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. This was home. The jeers from the Acorn Summit dugout, the encouraging shouts from my own teammates, the weight of the moment, it all faded away. It was just me, the pitcher and the ball. The pitcher for Acorn was their star. He was tired, but he was a competitor. He threw me a nasty curveball on the first pitch. I watched it break just outside the plate. Ball 1. He came back with a fastball on the hands. I fouled it straight back. 1-1. The tension was unbearable for everyone but me. I was locked in. He threw another curveball, but he left this one hanging, a little loopy spinner right over the middle. My eyes went wide. My coach used to call that a mistake pitch. He'd say, "Don't miss the mistakes." I didn't. I put everything into that swing. Not just my strength, but 3 years of frustration. 3 years of being told I wasn't good enough. 3 years of silence. The sound that came off the bat wasn't a crack. It was an explosion. The ball rocketed off the barrel, a white blur against the blue sky, climbing higher and higher. The outfielders didn't even move. They just turned and watched it go. It sailed over the left field fence, landing with a distant thud somewhere in the parking lot. A walk-off home run. We had won the championship. For a second, there was stunned silence. Then our dugout erupted. My teammates poured onto the field, screaming, jumping, and dogpiled me at home plate. I was at the bottom of the pile again, just like in college, covered in dirt, laughing, gasping for air, surrounded by my team, the real team. When I finally emerged, breathless and grinning, I saw 2 things. The first was Vince, standing alone by his dugout, his face ashen. He looked old, and small, and utterly defeated. The second thing I saw was Eleanor Vance, walking down from the bleachers, straight towards me. She bypassed the Acorn Summit team, she bypassed Vince, and she stopped right in front of me. She had a huge grin on her face. She stuck out her hand. "That was one hell of a game," she said. Her handshake firm and strong. And that was the smartest piece of in-game leadership I've seen in a long time. You don't just play shortstop, you command the entire field. "Thank you," I managed to say, my heart still pounding. "My office told me you're the senior analyst on our account at Sterling," she continued, her eyes sharp and appraising. "But what I saw out here today wasn't an analyst. That was a director. That was a vice president. That was someone who knows how to build a team and win." She pulled a business card out of her pocket. "My personal cell is on the back. Call me on Monday. We need to talk about your future. A company that lets talent like you languish in a cubicle doesn't deserve our business, and it certainly doesn't deserve you." And with that she turned and walked away, leaving me standing at home plate with my cheering teammates, holding her business card in one hand and a championship trophy in the other. My new reality had just begun. The aftermath was swift and beautiful. On Monday morning, I walked into Vince's office. He was sitting at his desk, staring into space. He looked like he hadn't slept. I didn't say a word. I just placed my letter of resignation on his desk. Tucked neatly inside the fold was a glossy 8x10 team photo from my college days, the one where I'm holding the national championship trophy. He opened it, looked at the photo, then up at me, his face a mixture of confusion, dawning horror, and defeat. For the first time he saw me, not the quiet box ticker, not the emotional woman. He saw the person who had dismantled his entire world with a bat and a glove. I just gave him a small, tight smile, turned, and walked out without another word. I called Eleanor Vance. An hour later. The job offer was real. It wasn't just for a promotion, it was for a newly created position, Director of Strategic Initiatives. It was a leadership role, a role with real power, a role that valued vision and execution over executive presence. My first act after accepting, I called Clara and told her they had an opening in their design department. She interviewed the next week and got the job. Brenda and David stayed at Sterling, but things were different. The story of the championship game had spread like wildfire. Vince was a laughingstock. His authority was shattered. Within 6 months, after losing the Acorn Summit account, Eleanor made good on her word. He was quietly reassigned to a meaningless role in another branch. His team players, Chad and Kevin, floundered without him to protect them and were eventually let go for incompetence. So here I am now. It's been a year. I have a corner office with a view of the city. I lead a team that respects me. I am valued for my mind, for my strategy, and for my leadership. It wasn't about revenge, until it was, but in the end it became about something more. It was about justice. It was about proving that competence is not gendered, that leadership isn't about being the loudest person in the room, and that sometimes the best way to be a team player is to build a new team, one that deserves you. Vince thought he was teaching me a lesson about teamwork, but all he did was remind me of who I was all along. He just gave me the perfect field on which to prove it. So I want to ask you, has anyone ever put you in a box? Have they ever underestimated you, dismissed you, or tried to define you by their own narrow, biased standards? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I know how powerful it is to feel seen. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about getting the justice you deserve. Remember, your moment will come. Just be ready to step up to the plate when it does.